And are you inquiring of the Lord on every little small decision? Like, talk to me about that. I'm actually trying to draw something out here, right? Because I know that that is a mistake that so many early kingdom entrepreneurs make. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to the Kingdom Business Podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest. He is a practitioner of everything that we're trying to get across here. He is a real marketplace general, but he's a radical believer in the marketplace, creating change and doing it at a great scale. So, Chuck, it's so good to have you with us on the podcast. Why don't you tell our audience who is Chuck McCallum?
Love to do that, Wes. I am a CEO of an engineering company in California. It's called Kier+Wright Civil Engineers. And we're a company that's scaled significantly over the last 10 years. And I consider that the reason for that is the kingdom and what I carry inside. So Chuck McCallum is a believer who lives his life in Christ in kind of overt and covert ways in the marketplace. And I'm also a pastor. I grew up in the Vineyard Christian Fellowship. I had an encounter with a man named Lonnie Frisbee when I was 19 years old. Some of you may have seen the new movie, The Jesus Revolution, where I was one of those. I was after that movie, but I was involved with the Vineyard Christian Fellowship and John Wimber, who also had a great impact on my life. And so Chuck McCallum was a young man who went to school to be an engineer, couldn't decide between being a businessman or a church planner, so I just did both. So I planted churches and I've also run businesses, and I maximized a business here in California that has grown significantly and changed the culture over the last 20 years.
That's fantastic. All right, so the company, Kier+Wright, why don't you take us through what happened? I know started in, was 1972, I think, from my research. You joined in 2011. So how did you get started in that business, and how's it sitting today?
Yes, I've actually been a little bit longer, but I've been a partner in it, for, since, over the last 10 to 15 years. I got involved in Kier+Wright by moving up here to plant a church. So I actually came up here as part of the Vineyard, and a good friend of mine, Michael Brazier, who I think may know you, also planted a church as well. So I came to plant a church, and I was a civil engineer as well as a pastor trained through the Vineyard Christian Fellowship. So I moved to the Bay Area in 1987 to help with church ministry. And my focus for the first 7 years that I was here was all on church ministry. I started small groups. I helped grow a church to about 800 people and was very significant in that ministry in a vineyard that was planted here in Redwood City and Palo Alto. During that time, I got a job at Kier+Wright and ended up leaving Kier+Wright in order to become a full-time pastor. And then around 1994, 1995, there was a transition in my life and a transition in the vineyard that caused me to go back into business, where basically the church got smaller. A lot of people moved out of California. Our church got a lot smaller. Our senior pastor wasn't as happy with what was occurring in the church, and I was the most employable person, so I ended up going into business full-time in 1994, and that's when I became part of Kier+Wright as a young engineer. And so I came in as a Christian believer into a construction industry in California where everybody swore. It was a really difficult situation, and God started to speak to me, and he started teaching me what it meant to be a son in a secular environment. And he started talking to me about myself, and he started talking to me about the impact I could make. So over time, I started becoming very successful because of the values I carried in my faith. I always collaboration, problem solving, responsiveness are brandy, but those were things that were in me that were really significant, and my faith. And so 2000, it was actually 2006 that I became a partner at Kier+Wright. And after I bought into the company and took about 5 years to buy it, in 2011, I started managing the engineering side of the company. In 2018, I became the CEO at Kier+Wright, where we've grown from 70 people, $8 million revenue, to 230 people, $60 million revenue. And what excites me about that is the growth has come because of the culture changes that we made at Kier+Wright. Kier+Wright is probably one of the preferred firms throughout all California. We have 8 offices all over California, and people actually come to Kier+Wright because of its culture. We were just voted one of the best places to work in the entire San Francisco Bay Area.
I mean, that's fruit, right, of everything that you're trying to build.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly encouraging. Hey, I wanted to jump in here during the podcast and let you know about Greenhouse Media. It's one of the service offerings inside the Business Greenhouse suite of services. And it's essentially, we're a full service digital marketing agency. And there's a lot of agencies out there, but there's a couple of things that make us unique. The first thing is that I'm only interested in business results. I'm not out there trying to get people more comments, more likes, more shares. I just want to drive people results that matter. Good quality phone calls, good quality lead forms, ultimately the lead generator that helps you scale your business. The second thing that makes us unique is we're a collaborative team under one roof. So whereas in years gone by, you might have one provider for your website, one provider for SEO, one provider for Google, and then if things don't work, they all point the finger. We are all accountable and collaborative to make sure that we together work on achieving the outcomes you want. So we've got hundreds of clients and thousands of campaigns running across Australia and beyond. And Jamie heads up as head of strategy that side of the business. Jamie, why don't you tell us some of the results that we've had with our clients recently?
Yeah, we've taken hundreds of businesses across different industries through our process. Some standouts for me over the last 12 months. We took a plumbing company from 1 location to 4 locations across 3 states, all through a website built by our team, Google Ads and Facebook Ads. We scaled an e-commerce business. We doubled their revenue in the last 12 months, and they had their best year yet. We took a mechanic in Sydney from very few leads to over 350 phone calls per month over 6 months. We also work with smaller budgets, so we took a small carpenter in Sydney with only $500 a month and got them a $20,000 job in their first month of ads. So a lot of good results, but they're the standouts for me in the last 12 months.
Some great stories. Ultimately, we're marketers. We're not people that just put ads together. There's plenty of those, but we think like marketers to drive actual results. If I've piqued your interest, then click on the link below, head over to our page, and there you'll find a diary. You can book a time that suits you, and Jamie and I will jump on a call with you and ascertain what are the business results you need and can we get them for you. All right, let's get back to the podcast. Here's where my mind went to during that. It's like, cool. So around the early stages of you buying in as partner, you then go through the global financial crisis, right? So you're in there trying to be a minister in the marketplace, and you're in construction in the US, and the GFC comes. Take us through that. Like, give us a couple of keys around that period of time, because that would have been testing, I would think, to live out the call of trying to be a minister in a secular world.
Yeah, 2008, the economy fell apart. I lost every one of my clients. They all went bankrupt. Lehman was the bank that was giving money to most of my clients. And I came back, I was on a vacation with my wife in Scotland, of all places. And I came back and all my clients went bankrupt. And I owed the company probably $1.5 million because I was buying into the partnership. And I was driving down the freeway one day, and the Holy Spirit speaks to me. I'm driving down the freeway, and I hear the voice of God and said, "What are you worried about?" And all of a sudden, in my own mind, I saw buildings coming up on the 580 freeway here in San Francisco, all the way out to Tracy, California, which is the Central Valley. And I had this peace that everything was going to be fine. So I go to work, I have these employees that I'm working with, and I have the peace of God that everything's going to happen. Right around that time, I got a project with a church that no one wanted me to work with. It was in Livermore, California. It was a small project. And sometimes on the business side, people were concerned of working with churches because they weren't sure they could pay their money or do as well. I wanted to go and bless the church, work with the church. This church, short story, it was Crosswinds Church here in California. This small project ended up becoming a $360 million infrastructure project that saw us through the downturn in the economy and was able to keep 90 of our employees going during that 2010, 2011 time, which was incredible. So my vision started happening, and we actually brought cities together. We brought clients together, lawyers, land developers, Simon, which is one of the biggest retail developers in the country. And I realized that God had put me in a place like a Joseph to provide resources for people during the downturn.
I love it. So you saw an open vision or a vision, however you would work.
Yes.
Did the church project get you through until you started doing the work in the vision, or was the church part of the vision? Like, was that on that highway, the church, or was that the work that got you through until you had the work that was lining the highway?
It got me through because I was serving the Lord to do this project, but I also came up with alternatives for them to be able to sell their property and make some money. So they moved their project from one location on this piece of property they owned. They had all this property, and they moved it to another location. They sold it to Simon, and because they were able to make that sell, they were able to build their project completely without through selling the property, because there was no infrastructure for this property, no utilities, no freeway interchange, nothing was there. So I always say this, I help other people's dreams come true. So I was helping them in their dream, God provided for my dream and for my employees at Kier+Wright.
Because one of the things that I really want to kind of explore and go deep in is, like, you get a vision, but sometimes you have to wait for it to come to pass, right? And that's a real test for some people, because you get excited, right? You get a vision, you're driving down the highway, you get excited, and then what about tomorrow morning, or what about 3 months later, or what about 2 years later? And you obviously had to hang on to that, right? You know, and kind of let it sit in your heart so that it wasn't just a nice moment. But yeah, I think that's a real challenge, is waiting years to see something come to pass.
Yes, and they're like, for me, the success in business took many years, because remember, this is 2012. I had been working in the business for quite a while, not knowing why I had been placed in that location. And sometimes God, I had a word as a young man from Bob Jones that said, God's going to move you and you're going to make money.
Wow.
And I ended up getting moved into business and working in a construction related field that was a tough place. I started carrying the character of God into that environment. And all of a sudden, people started looking to me as their resource in the middle of this. When it comes to waiting, I think perseverance is really important. And what I call pracs, Proverbs and Acts. As business people, we need the wisdom of Proverbs to walk into situations, and we need the power of Acts, so visions and encounters. And when we can bring those two together in a way that's supernaturally natural, we start having impact on people's lives. And I've started to see that happen. I mean, I could share an example. One of the examples that happened a few years after this, in 2015, was when we got Facebook as a client. And this was like crazy what happened, but I was in a conference room and we had started growing as a result of this church project, and our business was growing and raising up, and there were a couple other projects that were happening. And I walked into the conference room with unbelievers. Some of our staff are believers, some are not. But I erased off clients off our board because they weren't those particular clients were creating so much stress over people's lives, and they were worried about them. And that didn't mean I didn't value them, but it meant that I was looking for something bigger and greater impact. So I wrote on the board Facebook, and I didn't know anybody at Facebook. And I said, we need to be ready when Facebook comes in the door, because they could come in the door any day. I just made that declaration. This is the crazy thing. I went to my voicemail and I knew nobody at Facebook, no one that I knew of. And this guy, Gabe Patty, calls me on the phone and says, hey, Chuck, we'd like you to work on the Facebook project. We heard about you and we'd like to give you that project. So we ended up working on MPK 21 in Menlo Park, which was the headquarters for Mark Zuckerberg, which we ended up working with Geary Architects, which is one of the top architects in the world. And a great opportunity. And to me, that was supernatural. Like, I was learning to walk as a son all those years where I had been learning to listen to the Holy Spirit and walk as a son. Now, because I had learned that, I was starting to walk in authority in my sphere of influence in the marketplace, because I had learned how to carry sonship into a business setting.
That's awesome. That's a cool story, hey? And that probably leads to other business and other relationships that you never could have engineered in your own strength. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Now, speaking of wisdom, you have a book called Kingdom Catalyst, and so we'll hook that up. I know that's available on Amazon, so we'll put up a big link for that so that people can go grab it and find out a little bit more. I dug into the book. It's got some cool stuff. So Kier+Wright is on the surface, doing my research, nothing to say that it is a faith-based business, right? Which is cool because we don't have to brand everything, right? But you have decided to give people an expression of heaven, you know, as a leader in the company. I think you're president at this stage.
Yes.
You can clear that up. But so how, I want to get some practical keys for our listeners. How can somebody running a $60 million business with a 230 person headcount, how can you bring heaven to earth practically in a business like that, both to your team and your suppliers and your customers and your community? How do you do that?
There's many different ways. How you treat your employees, how you do your finances. One of the things that we've done at Kier+Wright is we pay over 10%. We put that in the profit sharing for people. We pay medical care for the entire family. Most businesses don't do that. We have stepped out in. I have helped many individuals succeed by mentoring them in powerful ways. One of the things I did was I brought a business coach in, who's Kingdom Coach, and I called him the pastor of my partners, and he started coaching my partners on a lot of things in their lives, how to communicate, healthy communication, all of them Christian values, using secular words to communicate Christian values. And the funny thing is, people started asking me about Christ as a result of changing the values in the company, because they started finding out what it felt like to live in an atmosphere that carried the kingdom of heaven. And so for me, I'm excited to work in a company that is not purely Christian. This is my world. I love working with, we get to work with a lot of mayors and government agencies, and they like to come. For example, one time I have a client, Prologis, who's a logistics partner, And one day I was experiencing the joy of the Lord. Some young Bethel students came over and prayed for me, and I experienced joy. And I walked into the room as a businessman. And I'm feeling joy, and I have a smile on my face, and I'm laughing a little bit into the room. And I walk into the room, and all of a sudden, I had the city of Tracy there. I had Prologis there. I had attorneys, architects, and all of a sudden, they started experiencing joy in the room because Chuck was experiencing joy. And they looked at me and they said, Chuck, what, first of all, they looked around and said, why are we all so happy? Why are we all laughing? They could feel the palpable presence of something different in the room. And they decided to meet in my conference room, right? Because I'm carrying that atmosphere. That atmosphere is then infiltrating the place that we're in. And as a result, they looked at me and they said, Chuck, it's Chuck. It's Chuck, why we're experiencing this joy. And why are we experiencing this joy, Chuck? It was like a book of Acts. And what I said, you wouldn't understand if I told you, but doesn't it feel good? And they said, yes. And they kept coming back to my conference room. And because the party started getting together, it was a big negotiation. They agreed on something that saved my developer, my client, seriously, $150 million. Because they were building this large project in Tracy, which was along the freeway, similar to my vision. This came, 3 or 4 years after this. They saved $150 million because they could negotiate and get along. And so when you bring the kingdom of God into any atmosphere, people start noticing that you're different, and they start asking you questions. So I believe that's what I do at Kier+Wright. I've seen people come to know the Lord. I've actually prayed for people, gotten words of knowledge. I don't know if your audience has experienced that, but and I pray for the sick, but they've also just experienced love and encouragement. And so I am their church in a sense.
Yeah.
I am their village. I am their impact, because people are not going to go to church nowadays. So they get to impact. What are they going to walk into the room and experience? And now my employees are actually hiring believers, not knowing they're believers, because they like the values that they carry.
Yeah, and let's get practical. Like, you save a client 150 million, and it probably doesn't matter what you say to them, they'll listen, right? Like, I remember David solved all of the king's problems, headaches, and that before he ever opened his mouth about who he was, right, and what he believed. And I think there's a real key there to just go and solve problems for people. And we don't know what next week and next month holds for you. There could be that one of these guys in the council or whatever, or in the company, hits rock bottom and thinks, I've got to go speak to Chuck for some reason. It's a timeline of events that never stops. The day you go to glory will be the day it stops. And so, it's all just activity that leads towards pointing people to heaven. And it's a wonderful thing. So I think because of the size of business that you've built and the time that you've been involved, I spend my time with businesses that are typically a bit earlier stage than you, right? Like literally from startup through to probably 50 million would be where I actually invest my time. We would have listeners of businesses that are all over the place, but where I invest my time. Common theme a lot of people kind of think through is the tension between how much is my bit and how much is God's bit. I think that's a common, I had to wrestle with it when I was younger. And I heard you address this in quite a unique way around the collaboration about, he gave us gifts and talents. And so I just want you to unpack that. Like how do you see that dynamic, playing out best between I'm gifted, but I don't want to do it on my own strength. God's amazing, but I don't want to abdicate. How do you walk that line?
Yeah, there's the 4 A's for me of wealth, and that's not just money. So you have assets, they come from the Lord. You have access, which is listening to him. You have atmosphere that you carry as a son or daughter, and you have abilities. And those 4 A's are what I rely on God. I realize that when I fail at this is usually when I go in the wrong direction, is when I sit and listen to him and I take a moment and say, Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, however I'm talking to God that day, I'll say, show me what you're doing, show me what you're up to. And as soon as I do, heaven opens. And at the same time, I'm a engineer, so I'm a brainstormer. I do mental gymnastics. Somebody prophesied over me once, because that's how I think. And I realize that God is teaming with me. He's accepted me the way I am, and he can utilize my talents the way they need to be done. So there are things like, for me, because of my strengths and abilities, I realize they come from God, but those are my easies. Like, I'm good at math. I'm an engineer, so I can figure things out, and I'm a connector. So I see a lot of things that way. But God really helps me with the hard stuff, and usually he sends people, he sends opportunities where if I'm listening to it, a lot of times he speaks through my wife, but he gives me guidance. And so I'm dependent on him and asking him. And so, my goal is to be a level 5 leader, like the book talks about, where I carry humility and I can come behind the scene and help whoever I'm working with succeed at what they do. So I think listening is a key. Humility is a key. Mustard seed, I have this thing called mustard seed faith. I feel like the mustard seed is the little thing that God gives you that you don't realize can move a mountain. And I believe that many people need to recognize through their relationship with God what their mustard seed is, and they'll start moving some mountains.
Nice.
Yeah.
And are you inquiring of the Lord on every little small decision? Like, no, see, that's talk to me about that, because I'm actually trying to draw something out here, right? So it's like, because I know that is a mistake that so many early kingdom entrepreneurs make, is that they feel, especially those that would have more of a prophetic edge in their church life. They're feeling like, what color, the tie that I wear today should be driven by the Lord. And by the way, that's fine. Like, if the Lord's taken you on a journey to listen to that finer detail, wonderful. But like, for everything to be like, what shade of blue on my business card? Should I hire this person? Do I need a new chair for my office? There are people that are caught up. So then they spend 4 weeks making that decision instead of just building a business. So, and then of course we don't want to run ahead of the Lord. So,
well, that's like going into a football game or a sporting event and trying to play the game, asking God every little question, right? If you realize you're in touch with him all the time, he may say, go to the right, go to the left, and you may hear certain things as you're doing it, but you know how to play football. That's your skill set, that's what you've learned. You also have a team that you're working with, that you've got people to help you. And so he'll put people in your life that carry favor. I think it's really important as a business person. I learn from other people. So I'm constantly trying to, if I have an employee or I have a leader that can help guide me, and they carry peace, and I see that it's going a direction that I'm comfortable with, sometimes I will let them lead. So my whole goal is to mentor. I don't have to control everything. And I believe that God actually, he put 2 trees in the garden for a reason. He wants you to make a good decision, but he's into giving us freedom to make choices. And he called us to rule the world, or to guide the world, but we need to do so in the proper identity as a son or daughter in Christ that has been redeemed. So for me, I focus more on my character, listening to God, being open to hear him. And I don't ask him what I do every day. I do say, what are the 2 or 3 things I should focus on each day? I write them down. And if I get those 3 things done, I feel like I've achieved something for the day, because I usually have a list of 50.
So like, as I listen to that, I'm like, that's where a lot of your joy would come from, because there's this anxiousness that you're just not choosing to carry, right? There's just this, there's an element of freedom to your walk that allows you to be a lot more present with joy, which is super clever, really.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can't punish myself for a mistake if I'm not listening to God exactly. Because I've found that God is so into his kids that I may make a mistake. He helps me. Like he could bring you into my life at the right time, or somebody else into my life at the right time that can give me the counsel and the wisdom that I need during that part. So why worry and be anxious about everything you're doing? I felt like Jesus says we're supposed to enter into rest. And I think when we can successfully work hard but carry rest, because to me rest is not about working, it's about having peace and the ability to trust God with how he's created you. So you do make decisions. So sometimes it's very obvious, but sometimes it's more like you trust how God has created you to make good decisions.
I love it. All right. So like I said before, there's a bunch of different stages of business that would be listening to this. And, you know, there could be somebody right now who's listening to this, you know, either next week after we record it, or, you know, 6 months down the line, 6 years. And, you know, they're running on a treadmill, or they're mowing the lawn, or they're going for a drive, and they are challenged right now. They're questioning it all. It's tough. You know, a lot of the business is not making sense. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, don't make any hasty decisions right away. A lot of times when things aren't going well, you want to change direction, and it doesn't mean you're going in the wrong direction. So you need to pause and evaluate and get good counselors around you, and figure out if you're still passionate about where you're going. But I also think be slow to make that decision. Pause for a second and think about it, and get input from multiple counselors, including the Holy Spirit, including those around you that you trust, and build healthy relationships. And then evaluate, why is it failing? Why are things going wrong? You know, I had a business coach where he say the acronym he had was GOAL, GOAL. You set a goal, and you look at obstacles. The first thing you do is your obstacles are actually opportunities. Opportunities for you to move into the next place, and they actually help you create the action steps for where you go. So G stands for goal, O stands for obstacles, A stands for the action steps that you need to take, and then you move into your then you look at your long-term goals of where you want to go. And I feel like so many people give up too quickly. So I would say find people around you who actually are counselors around you that can help guide you so that you can be grounded, but don't necessarily change your direction right away.
Yeah, that's such good wisdom, and you nailed it. Like, people give up too quickly. That's the world that we live in today. Like, no one wants long suffering anymore, right? But you know, like you've been decades of doing the same thing for it to kind of figure out. And you know, approaching the end of my second decade too in business, and it just takes a long time.
It does.
Like it's, you know, we get the few anomalies that can build a massive business in 15 years. And then we think that's normal. And it's the 1% of the 1%, right? You know, the rest, it takes decades to build anything great. And so,
Reformation takes 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, that's right. I really appreciate all of that. There's a lot of wisdom in there. You know, that's come from a solid season of being a kingdom entrepreneur. And so we really appreciate that, and really appreciate you giving us your time. You know, I know you've got 400 things to do. You said you got 50 things on your list today. So giving us this time and investing into our audience it means the world to me. So I thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
So guys, as we do at the end of every podcast, I want the feedback loop, right? You know, what did Chuck say that really resonated with you? You know, there'd be a whole bunch of things, but what was the one thing that kind of leaped for you? I want you to take that and put it in the comments for me so that I can see. I want the feedback loop of you know, of what it was that landed in your world. And remember, you know, if you're going to listen to this podcast, there's got to be some actionable steps at the end. Otherwise, it's just another 40 minutes or whatever that you filled of your life. There's got to be something tangible from this. So make sure that you take some of Chuck's wisdom and apply it to your life. That way, you'll be closer to where you want to be. Chuck, really appreciate you. Thanks, mate.
Thank you. I'm glad I was here.